You're listening to Faith, Stewardship, and Insurance, Protecting Texas Churches. The show that gives pastors and church leaders the clarity they need to protect their people, property, and ministry.
Welcome back to Faith, Stewardship, and Insurance, Protecting Texas Churches. I'm your host, Ron Wadley, with Insurance for Texans. On this show, we help church leaders cut through the noise and gain the clarity they need to protect their ministries with confidence. Today, I want to tell you about Pastor Rick. He was a pastor who served a small congregation in the Panhandle east of Amarillo. His church was simple, debt-free, and full of faithful people. As a small-town preacher, Rick wore all the hats. He was not only the preacher, but also the counselor, janitor, and yes, even the one who made the insurance decisions for the church. One night in March, a tornado tore through the town just after midnight. It only lasted minutes, but by the time the winds died down, the church was decimated. Rick, who lived in the parsonage across the street from the church, had plucked his young son out of his bed just before the window shattered across the bedroom. He stood in the parking lot staring at the wreckage. The windows were shattered. The walls and roof were severely damaged, and water had poured in from the thunderstorm that followed. The congregation and his family were safe, but the building they called home was broken. Even in the midst of this kind of chaos, Rick operated with a sense of peace and calm as he assessed the damage that night and the next day. There are 3 lessons that we can learn from Rick's experience and his planning. Number 1 is that certainty brings peace. Rick wasn't worried about what would happen next when the tornado struck. While he couldn't tell you exactly what his policy covered the night that the tornado hit, he had worked with a local agent who helped them craft a policy to cover major events like this one. Because of his planning, he knew the church would be able to rebuild. He worked with a church insurance advisor who made sure the coverage actually reflected the real risks they faced. A second lesson that Rick's story teaches us is that you can't wait until after the storm to choose the right insurance policy. There was no let's call someone now moment when the tornado hit. Rick couldn't go back and upgrade his policy. He couldn't lower his deductible. He couldn't add flood protection or replacement cost coverage after the fact. It was either done right ahead of time or not at all. Once it's over, it's over. Lastly, confidence comes from knowing you're protected. Once the insurance adjuster came and confirmed how the policy was going to respond, Rick's focus shifted. He wasn't trapped in endless paperwork or wondering if they'd be able to rebuild his church. Instead, he started working with church leaders and talking with contractors. He started planning where to meet in the meantime. He was able to lead his people forward. At Insurance for Texans, we've seen what happens when churches trust their insurance to national call centers or inexperienced agents who don't understand churches or their ministries. We've also seen what happens when a storm hits a church that's properly protected with rock-solid coverage. True Texas Church Insurance exists to help churches like yours experience the same kind of peace Rick had when the tornado came to that little oil field town. As church insurance agents, our job is to make sure your policy matches your actual risks. Real protection for real churches who want to serve with the promise of certainty. Rick would have been the first to tell you that no insurance policy will ever be as powerful as God's promise of grace. One is eternal. The other is financial. Pastor Rick loved a great analogy and used them often. His sermons were full of analogies that helped his congregation to understand and learn God's truths. Rick was my dad, and I was the young boy that was plucked from the bed during the tornado. Dad found his promise of certainty many years ago when a heart attack caught up with him. I use his teaching style and the lessons I learned from him to lead Insurance for Texans. Grace gives believers like him and me a foundation that cannot be shaken under any circumstance. Insurance, when done right, gives your ministries a similar sense of confidence and stability in the face of earthly disasters. That's why getting it right matters, and it will always matter to us. If you want this kind of confidence for your ministry, visit insurancefortexans.com to schedule a personalized review of your policy. And if you'd like to go deeper, get a copy of my book, The Promise of Certainty, at thepromiseofcertainty.com. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Faith Stewardship and Insurance. I'm Ron Wadley, reminding you, when the wind comes, you want to lead with clarity, not fear.
Thanks for listening to Faith, Stewardship, and Insurance. Until next time, remember, insurance isn't just about policies. It's about safeguarding the mission God has called you to lead.